of skills, he remembered that lizard with the substitute ability. That skill had proven to be quite interesting and useful. If he could find and consume more monsters with unique skills, his strength and versatility would only grow. A few moments later, Rude arrived at the 21st floor of the labyrinth, where he encountered cat-sized moths and poisonous frogs. Without hesitation, he used his lightning cloak skill, electrocuting them instantly. The electrical charge wasn't to be messed with either, as it easily scattered and connected to the nearest targets, leaving all of them charred. This delighted him, as he realized this skill was more versatile than he initially thought, proving effective at both close and medium range. And the monsters here seemed to specialize in inflicting status ailments, but they had picked the wrong opponent. Now they became food for him, turning into a meal akin to chicken tenders. Biting into them was just as delicious, with the poison frog meat melting in his mouth. The seasoning even reminded him of Morphus, making him crave a beer. In addition to the satisfying meal, he gained new skills such as venom, temperature variation, poison scale powder, paralysis scale powder, and aerial slash. These were excellent additions to his growing arsenal, but his attention was soon diverted by a crashing sound and human voices echoing through the cave. But this just excited him, as it was the first time he had noticed other adventurers making it this far in the miasma labyrinth. With this, he quickly tidied up his things and departed in the direction of the voices. He might have found people who shared his interest in this labyrinth, and if he was lucky, he might even be able to exchange valuable information with them. The possibility of finding like-minded individuals or gaining new insights into the labyrinth filled him with anticipation as he moved swiftly towards the source of the commotion. In the direction of the noise, 4 men encircling another adventurer. It seemed they were in conflict, as the lone adventurer was bleeding on the ground, helpless and outnumbered. But the attackers were also roughed up, sporting bruises from the fight despite their numerical advantage. They couldn't believe she still had so much magic left. But the leader just smirked, as he found the trouble worth it since they had got themselves an elf woman. Removing her hood to reveal her flawless face, they marveled at her beauty, but more excited to know she would made them rich. And that is because elves were rare in this region, and their appearance was highly coveted, with royalty willing to pay a hefty sum for one. But their greedy celebration was interrupted by a voice echoing from behind. Disappointed by the scene before him, Rude had hoped to make some adventurer friends, but find this instead. And although he doesn't know the full story, they couldn't expect him to stand by while they gang up on a lone adventurer. So he asks them to run them hands. But first, the leader demanded to know who he was, and Rude just smirked and answered vaguely that he was just an adventurer for fun. Meanwhile, the elf woman, desperate to prevent Rude from getting involved, warned him to leave, revealing that these men were adventurer hunters. This surprised Rude, but instead of cowering, he used his appraisal skill on them, fully aware that adventurer hunters were high-ranking adventurers. Still, he was taken aback to find the lowest among them was at level 52. But what perplexed him even more was his inability to see any other information besides their level, making him suspect that they had some concealment skill or counter-magic tool hiding their stats. But before Rude could react, the leader ordered one of his men to take him down. Immediately, the blonde guy zoomed in for the kill, moving so fast that even Rude was taken aback by how quickly he closed the gap. Despite the surprise, Rude managed to block the attack. The blonde guy, impressed, sarcastically complimented him, noting that Rude was doing better than expected. But Rude just shot back with a diss, suggesting that Blondie was just weak, which quickly angered the guy, as he had some serious anger issues. But now Rude could barely hold his ground as the blonde guy pressed even harder while shouting threats to smash his head. Even his mates smirked from the side, confident that Rude was done for, knowing how unhinged their companion could get. But what they didn't expect was that Rude had tricks up his sleeve. Using his newly acquired venom ability, he spat it out directly on the blondie's face, catching everyone off guard. The next thing they heard were the screams of the blonde guy, echoing through the cave as he flailed around in agony. The realization hit them hard. Rude was a threat, almost like a monster, while Rude just smirked menacingly at them, showing he was more vile than they could have imagined. Using underhand tactics was how he, a once weak person, had survived. And moments after, the blondie's screams eventually ceased as the venom melted his face and seeped through his veins, poisoning him from the inside, stopping his vital organs. Seeing this, the leader concluded that Rude's poison ability must be a unique skill, making him a formidable opponent. With this realization, he commanded all 3 remaining men to charge at Rude simultaneously. And so they did just that, moving faster than the blondie ever had. Rude felt like if he stopped for even a second, he would get killed. Despite his relentless efforts to stay ahead, these guys were unyielding and coordinated, giving him no chance to recover. They pushed him into a corner, creating an opening for a one-shot kill. Fortunately, Rude had obtained a defensive skill, allowing him to survive a frontal kick to the head that sent him flying a few feet away toward the poisonous swamp. Even the leader was shocked at how durable Rude was. He had been sure the kick would have broken Rude's neck instantly. But there he was, still standing like it was just a tap. The fight wasn't over. The brown-haired hunter stepped closer, ready to snuff out Rude's life right away. To his surprise, instead of fighting back, Rude opted for a retreat, moving deeper into the swamp. Obviously, the hunter chased after him, not wanting to let him get away, but the leader commanded him to stop, reminding him that what he was standing on was a poisonous swamp. It wasn't guaranteed he would come out alive if he went any deeper, and he is sure that Rude shouldn't be able to withstand the poisonous swamp either. He'll come out soon enough. And as Rude turned around, he noticed the hunters hadn't chased after him, making him wonder just how long they were planning to stay in the poisonous swamp. So it seems like they are still adventurers at heart, as they decided to make it a competition on who would be the first to give up. Unfortunately for them, Rude had the home advantage. He even felt lucky that he had fallen into this poisonous swamp, as it was the perfect circumstance for him. On top of the usual miasma, the poisonous vapors around the swamp would rapidly drain the adventurer's stamina. So he just stood there and watched as they began to struggle, the swamp's effects quickly taking their toll on them. And with few minutes more, the hunters were breathing heavily, wondering how long he planned to stay in the swamp. It had been about 10 minutes already, and they could feel their heads hurting and nausea setting in. Luckily for them, they wouldn't have to wait long, as Rude decided it was time to act. Although he wanted to weaken them a bit more and wasn't affected by the poison, he realized that any longer might become an even bigger burden on the injured elf. And so he approached them and asked mockingly how they felt, being affected by both poison and miasma. The hunters, thinking he was a dead man walking, didn't bother with his questions and were sure to make him pay for causing them so much trouble. But as Rude got closer, instead of a face showing suffering, he greeted them with a smile and revealed that he was unaffected by any status abnormalities and didn't really know how much pain they were feeling. This immediately angered the hunters, realizing they had been tricked. Fueled by anger and frustration, they attacked him, even though he was still in the swamp, dancing on top of Rude's palm, and due to poison gradually drained their stamina, and the accumulated miasma lowered their stats. It was much easier for Rude to overpower them, but being outnumbered, it was easy for him to show an opening, in which the brown-haired hunter took advantage of it and attacked him. But this was just a trap set by Rude, and now that they are where he wanted them, he quickly used his lightning cloak to electrocute the two hunters, and the closest one died instantly, while the other barely managed to stand. So in a last desperate attempt, the remaining hunter launched himself at Rude, but Rude activated his aerial slash skill, cutting the hunter into pieces before he could even get close. As the horror unfolded, the leader of the adventurer hunters was stunned, unable to believe what had just transpired. He shouted in disbelief, demanding to know why a human possessed a monster's skills. But Rude has no obligation to explain, so he simply zoomed in for another attack. The adventurer they had previously overpowered now seemed stronger than before, or rather, they were relatively weaker, and he was now overpowering them. Despite having superior fighting skills against humans, the leader found himself at a disadvantage due to the miasma's effects. Still, he was determined not to lose, as he had worked his damned hardest and overcome much greater foes. So he used agility enhancement to kill Rude as he charged. But Rude just met him halfway with his physical boost, and shattered the hunter's sword in half before the blade could even reach him. The next thing the leader felt was his torso splitting from his lower half, and he collapsed, lifeless and broken like a Kit Kat, defeated by a novice. A few moments later, Rude and the elf were walking to get out of the labyrinth. The elf went ahead to thank Rude for saving her, expressing that she didn't know what would have happened if not for him. Rude replied that it was nothing, as he couldn't just leave her in that situation. But as they walked, he noticed that she was trying to be brave, but her body was still affected by the miasma. Even though he had done what he could for first aid, he knew that she must be hurting. But putting those thoughts aside, he found it rare to see an elf in such a remote area, so he wondered what kind of circumstances had led her to be chased by adventurer hunters. But his train of thought was disrupted by a sudden sound approaching. Looking in the direction, he saw a moth, much larger than the ones he had encountered before, which he assumed to be the leader of those moths, furious at what he had done to its underlings. Immediately, he used his appraisal skill and saw that it was a level 37 Great Mossphus, with stats averaging 110 and 6 skills in its arsenal. Despite this, Rude felt confident in taking it out. He had killed so many of them already, so he believed that its size alone wouldn't be enough to defeat him, and he launched himself at the Great Mossphus. But as soon as he got close, it used its aerial slash. With great reflexes, he dodged it just in time. But the attack went so far back that the elf was almost hit by it, prompting him to ask if she was okay. Thankfully she was, so he refocused on attacking the Mosphus. It seemed to have decided to fly away to create distance and attack from there. Rude quickly showed it that its tactic was futile by using his own aerial slash, widening its range to slice not only its body but its wings as well. This quickly angered the great Mosphus. With its wings tattered, it couldn't fly away anymore, so it resorted to using its paralyzing scales, but this just made Rude laugh. That kind of attack had no effect on him. However, his composure immediately shattered as he realized he wasn't alone. The injured elf might suffer from the attack, but it seemed he didn't have to worry about her. She demonstrated she could handle herself just fine, obliterating the scales like they weren't even there. This was quite a surprise. Rude hadn't expected her to have such a powerful skill, which made him more curious about how the hunters overpowered her if she possessed that kind of strength. He realized there was more to her story that he hadn't uncovered yet, but that wasn't his priority, as he still had an opponent to deal with. And so Rude swiftly moved in and killed the great Mosphus. But instead of him inquiring more about the elf, she approached him and started asking questions first. She was curious, noting that poison and paralysis didn't work on him either, and that his skills were almost like a monster's. She asks him how he had such ability, and Rude just laughed awkwardly, as he tries to find a way to explain without revealing too much. Unexpectedly, the elf collapsed on the spot, prompting him to ask if she was okay and if she had been hit by the paralyzing scales. Gasping on the floor, she replied that she wasn't hit, but it was something different. Since he had saved her, she felt he had the right to know the real reason for her circumstances, so she promised to tell him her story once they were out of the labyrinth. They hurriedly exited the labyrinth and rested in the forest just near the entrance. Without the miasma hindering their breathing, the elf felt much better. And as promised, she began explaining the situation. But first, she felt it was only right to introduce herself properly. Her name was Alicia, a former adventurer, and the name immediately rang a bell for Rude. So he quickly asked if she was the famous Alicia from the S-rank party. This made her smile, as it would make her story easier for him to understand. She confirmed his assumptions, revealing that she was indeed Alicia from the Azure Trails, the renowned S-rank party of the Kingdom of Ludius. Everyone knew its members. Just as Rude recalled, the Azure Trails had met a tragic fate that forced them to disband. 5 years ago, they were overpowered by a great monster. On that fateful day, they challenged the beast awaiting them at the deepest part of the S-rank abyssal labyrinth. In that battle, their leader died. One member had to retire due to severe injuries, and another was swallowed by the labyrinth. Even Alicia didn't come out unscathed. So she began to show him what she meant, but Rude, being an innocent pervert, misinterpreted it, thinking she was about to reveal both of her treasure so suddenly, so he stood up, both confused and excited. But he soon realized he was being silly, as he noticed what was in store inside Alicia's cloth. Well, it was obviously a cleavage, but it has a mark on it. Alicia then explained that this mark was the curse placed on her at that time. It was the curse of level down, and Rude admitted he had never heard of such a thing, while Alicia agreed, saying she hadn't heard of it either. She had traveled from place to place, and no one had ever heard of it before, let alone knew how to remove it, and she even tried every possible method to break the curse, but all she could do was slow its progression, and the adventurer hunters knew about her curse and were planning to profit from it. Even though she would die if her level reached 0, being at such guy's mercy was a fate she couldn't bear, and Rude felt bad for her. A once renowned adventurer reduced to this. A cruel fate worse than instant death. But there isn't a thing he could do, or so he thought, as an idea comes into mind. With the skill he had just acquired, Rude thought he might be able to help Alicia with her curse. So he immediately took out his guild card and checked what his substitute skill did, just as he expected. The skill allowed him to select a target and take on their attacks and status ailments. Without hesitation, he told Alicia he wanted to try something that might help her. He explained that he needed her to take on the skill he was about to activate. She was initially confused, but agreed, trusting him after everything he had done for her. And with Rude's hand on her shoulder and her guard down, he activated his substitution skill. Immediately, Alicia noticed a black aura creeping down his arm. It dawned on her that her curse was transferring to him, and she panicked. She knew the devastating effects of the curse and didn't want it to affect him, but she couldn't move away either, fearing it might lead to unexpected consequences. So she quickly told him to stop, warning that at this rate, the curse would harm him as well. But seeing her worry made Rude even more determined to help. So he just assured her with a warm smile, telling her it was okay and that she should trust him. And the next thing Alicia saw was the curse materializing into a demon. This was the first time it had reacted this way, as if it knew something significant was about to happen and tried its best to counter it. But before it could descend with its attack, a great light suddenly appeared. It was Rude's unique skill, the abnormal status nullification, burning the curse from the core. The demon could only scream as it disintegrated into nothingness. Then Rude casually checked his hand, revealing a satisfied smile as he confirmed his skill was working fine, while Alicia, on the other hand, stood there with a surprised expression, still in disbelief at what had happened. Rude then told her to check her guild card, so she did just that, and was astonished to see that, while her level hadn't returned to what it once was, her status had changed from cursed to normal. This was enough to fill her with relief. The curse she had been trying to remove had finally been lifted. Seeing her reaction, Rude proudly explained that it was thanks to his unique skill. He had thought it might nullify her curse if he took it on, and he was glad it worked properly. But he was caught off guard when Alicia called him an idiot. She couldn't believe he had taken such an immense risk for someone he had just met. But her words weren't meant with malice. They were filled with worry. She had come to realize that Rude was incredibly kind, and she didn't want something bad to happen to someone as pure as him, or for someone to take advantage of his kindness in this cruel world. But despite her initial outburst, Alechia was genuinely happy and relieved. She expressed her heartfelt gratitude for what Rude had done, which brought warmth to his eyes. He realized that she was indeed a wonderful person, worried for him, even though she was the one who had been suffering. In that moment, an unexpected bond was formed between them.